Yeah, 7. Ogogo, may I invite you to do the Bible reading, please?
Yes, today's Bible reading is from Nehemiah 7. After the wall had been rebuilt and I set the doors in place, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Anani, along with Ananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot, while the gatekeepers are still on duty. I have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses has not yet been rebuilt. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exile whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, in company with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Azra, Ramai, Nahamani, Mordecai, Bishan, Misparet, Bigval, Nahum, and Bana. The list of the men of Israel, the descendants of Perush, 2,172, of Shephiata, 372, of Hara, 652, of Patal, Moab, through the line of Joshua and Joab, 2,818, of Elam, 1,254, of Zatu, 845, of Zakai, 760, of Benoil, 648, of Bibal, 628, of Asgard, 2,322, of Adonikam, 667, of Bigval, 2,067, of Adin, 655, of Atta through Ezekiel, 98, of Ashum, 328, of Bizal, 324, of Arif, 112, of Gibbon, 95, the men of Bethlehem and Nitophan, 188, of Anotal, 128, of Beth Asmaphet, 42, of Kirat, Jerim, Kipharan, and Beirut, 743, of Ramal and Geba, 621, of Michmash, 122, of Bethel and Ai, 123, of the other Nebo, 52, of the other Elam, 1,254, of Arim, 320, of Jericho, 345, of Lod, Adi and Ono, 721, of Sinai, 3,930. The priest, the descendant of Jediah, through the family of Joshua, 973, of Immer, 1,052, of Peshua, 1,247, of Arim, 1,017. The Levite, the descendant of Jeshua, through Kadmiel, through the line of Adovia, 74. The musicians, the descendant of Ashva, 148. The gatekeepers, the descendants of Shalom, Atta, Tammo, Akab, Atita, and Sobael, 138. The temple servants, the descendants of Ziha, Ashwa, Taboat, Keros, Sia, Padon, Lebanon, Agaba, Shamael, Anai, Gidel, Gaha, Reha, Rezin, Nekoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Pasha, Basal, Menuel, Nefusim, Baka, Bakbuk, Abuka, Afa, Bazuel, Mehida, Asher, Bakos, Sisera, Tema, Nezar, and Atifa, the descendants of the servants of Solomon, the descendants of Satwai, Saphoret, Perida, Jala, Dako, Gidel, Shephatiah, Aitil, Okaret, Azeban, and Ammon, the temple servants and descendants of the servants of Solomon, 392. The following came up from the town of Tel Mala, Tel Asher, Kerab, Adam, Ima, but they could not show that their families were the descendants from Israel. The descendants of Dalian, Tobiah, and Nekoda, 642. And from among the priests, the descendants of Aboi, Akkoz, and Basilia, a man who had married a daughter of Basilia the Gileadite and was called by that name. This searched for their family records, but they could not find them, and so were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor therefore ordered them not to eat any of the most sacred food until there should be a priest ministering with the Urim and Thummim. The whole company numbered 42,360, beside their 7,327 male and female servants. They also had 245 males and female singers. There were 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. Some of the heads of the family contributed to the work. The governor gave to the treasury 1,000 darics of gold, 50 bowls, and 530 garments for the priests. Some of the heads of the family gave to the treasury for the works 20,000 darik of golds and 2,200 minas of silvers. The total given by the rest of the people were 20,000 darics of gold, 2,000 minas of silvers, and 67 garments for priests. The priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the temple servants, along with the setting of the people and the rest of Israelites, settled in their own towns. When the 7th month came, and the Israelites had settled in their towns. That is the reading.
Hello. Working? Hello? Yeah? Okay. Hey, yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. Um, Today we're setting our next step in the book of Nehemiah. And this time we are opening Nehemiah 7. And I was quite grateful that the whole chapter was read because to us, and I do this sometimes in my personal Bible reading, I just skip the genealogy. Haven't we all? But, and to us, sometimes they're just names and numbers. But what struck me was I was reading Genesis the other day, and God was speaking to Abram, and it said he took him outside, and he said, "Look at the stars. If you can count them, this is the number of your descendants." And when I was reading Nehemiah 7, I was reading it out loud, and I mean, a lot of respect for pronouncing the names so adequately. I was thinking, to the people of Israel, this was proof that the covenant was still alive. They just returned from exile. They were defeated. All hope seemed lost. And these names, these families, were the proof that God still had hope, still had a plan. I thought that was beautiful. Today's title of the sermon is Co-work, the Joy of Giving. And it focuses primarily on the last part of the chapter, where it is said, and I'll just read it again. And some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave to the work. The governor gave to the treasury 1,000 gold drachmas, 50 basins, and 530 priestly garments. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave to the treasury of the work 20,000 gold drachmas and 2,200 silver minas. And that which the rest of the people gave was 20,000 gold drachmas, 2,000 silver minas, and 67 priestly garments. So we read about the people giving to the work. I have a very sharp noise in my ear. And this sermon is not going to be about giving financially, because reading this part, we would, think, well, maybe this is going to be a sermon about, tithe and giving to the church. True, but I also want to kind of recap what's been happening. The mic, yeah? Okay. All right. Nothing more encouraging than technology just totally, going nuts. All right. Let's just start over, shall we? So, the title of this sermon is Co-work, the Joy of Giving. And I want to just take just a quick run through the book of Nehemiah, where we just end up, all right? So in the first chapter, we read that Nehemiah reminds God that his people and the city of Jerusalem are his crown jewels. He's basically saying to God, God, you have promised that if we return to you, that you would restore your covenant with us. Then, in the next chapter, Nehemiah goes up to Jerusalem. After inquiring with the king, he decides together with the officials to rebuild the wall because, and he says, God's hand is upon him. Then, chapter 3, rebuilding the wall. We read all about these families who contribute to the work. In chapter 4, we read about defending the wall. And Nehemiah says, our God will fight for us. In chapter 5, Nehemiah restores justice according to the law. And he sets an example himself by not eating the governor's provisions out of fear of God, because there was not enough food. He basically shared his own with the people. We read about a conspiracy against Nehemiah in chapter 6. Pastor Richmond preached on that last week. And we read about the completion of the wall. And then, in chapter 7, just at the end, we read that some of the heads of the father's houses give to the work. So what is the work exactly? Well, in Ezra 2:69, we find some context to this. It says, the families give to the treasury to restore God's temple. So From the information we have out of Nehemiah, we can safely assume that while the walls were rebuilt, still a lot of houses were not, and so wasn't the temple. So there was a contribution from the people, from the heads of the fathers' houses, who gave according to their ability to the treasury to have these things rebuilt. And that brings me to the core of Nehemiah and why it is that it feels so relevant to us today. I was thinking, just like Jerusalem was weak and vulnerable, so our churches can become weak and vulnerable. And I know that's not a very hopeful message to start off with, but I'll get to that. The thing is, as we read in Nehemiah, just restoring, rebuilding the city took the effort of all the people. It took the contribution of everyone. It wasn't just Nehemiah by himself. He received help from all kinds of people, his people. And with that help, he was able to rebuild the wall and restore Jerusalem's safety. So, the core of this message will be, if we, as co-workers with God, give according to our ability, we may find joy in knowing that God will provide the increase. I'll explain this one. So, the first point I want to make is the people in Jerusalem answered Nehemiah's call to rebuild the walls. We should also answer God's call to be his fellow workers. And I found a passage in 1 Corinthians 3 that I think has a lot of similarities between these two texts. Nehemiah is about rebuilding a physical city. 1 Corinthians 3 is about building the church. And it's more of a spiritual building. But those two are very connected. Just look at 1 Corinthians 3:9. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field. You are God's building. That's interesting, no? We are called to be God's fellow workers. We work side by side him. That means that his priorities become our priorities. And I was just thinking about, just look at this wonderful prayer that we all pray so often, our Father. Our Father who art in heaven, your kingdom come, your will be done in earth as it is in heaven. That's the first part. It's the most important part. What do we as Christians want is that God's kingdom comes, that his will be done. And how is that accomplished? Well, obviously through God himself, but also through us, his fellow workers. We're not only praying for God's will to be done. In some regards, we are also the answer to that prayer. Because we as Christians, if we don't do it, who else will? And I was thinking about a man that I met in Central Asia. He was from a church that cannot really profess their faith freely. And he had a good job. He had a very good job. Central Asia is not really a very rich part of the world. So just to have a salary and to be able to provide for your family is such a big deal. And he had a good job, and he was called to serve in a small little town. You see, he was working in the city. And everyone would move from these small little towns to the city because in the city there was work. In the small towns there were just farmers. He was called to go there and to share the gospel of Jesus. And he went there. And I thought, I thought when I was hearing that, I thought, wow, man, if I would be called to do something like that bold, would I? But he did, because he, I think, grasped better than I that this was God's priority to build his church over there, even though it would maybe mean that his personal life would be less comfortable. I really respected that. The second point is, if we want to experience joy through giving, we all need to chip in according to our ability. I think it's quite beautiful that Nehemiah 7 mentions that. Let's just see, where is it? Can't find it. All right, never mind. I think it's the NIV that says the fathers of the houses gave according to their ability. And I think in the church it's quite similar. We are not called to do everything by ourselves. We are a body. We all have different gifts, different talents. We have singers. We have people who are technicians. We have people who pray. We have people who are wonderful in doing missionary projects. And we all do it together according to which, it's given to us. All right, here it is. Got it. This is also a parallel verse from Ezra. I'm sorry, I was looking at Nehemiah. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses, when they came to the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, offered freely for the house of God to erect it in its place. According to their ability, they gave to the treasury for the work. According to their ability. And I was thinking, if each one of us gives according to our ability, what a wonderful church it would be, wouldn't it? But there's also a different side to the story, a side that I experienced very closely in a church where I grew up in. Because if people fail to give to their ability, it'll just ask more from the people who are already giving to their ability. And as I said, I experienced this firsthand. I think I was about a year of, I was 12. And we had this children's church leader, wonderful woman. I loved her. She was very passionate and enthusiastic about children's church. But there was a shortage in children's church leaders. And I remember every week she would come up, she would stand right here. She would say, "Please, we do not have enough children's church leaders. Please help." And week after week, no one would apply. I don't know why, and I'm not gonna think for the people who sat there. But there was no one. And eventually, she came up one Sunday, and I remember this vividly. She was standing here, and she just broke down crying. She said, "I can't do this anymore on my own. Please help me." No one applied. It's not entirely true. There were actually two 12-year-old boys. That was how I got involved in ministry. I was 12-year-old leading children's church. Some of the kids were a year younger than me. And not to say that I am somehow, better or more spiritual. Not at all. I just couldn't stand this woman crying. I thought, wow, how far have we slipped off to get here? How can we allow this to happen? That someone gets robbed of the joy of doing what she used to love just because there was just no one who would help her. Give according to what you can miss. Because if you don't, other people have to overcompensate for that. We are one church. We're one body. We all need each other. And even, you might think right now, well, I've thought about, joining children's church, joining the crash team. But, I don't feel like I'm gifted to do that. Well, I have some comfort and some wonderful promise to add to that. And that's the last point, point 3. If we all chip in according to our ability, we may rest in knowing that it is God who will provide the increase. I mentioned 1 Corinthians 3, and I just want to read a passage from it. Starting for verse 5. Who then is Paul? This is Paul speaking, by the way. And who is Apollos? But ministers through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 5 to 7. And this is so comforting to me. Because even though we might not feel equipped, there is a God who promises, if we give according to our ability, that he himself will provide the increase. I work for Open Doors, and the guy who started it all, Ann van der Bijl, brother Andrew, more commonly known as, he said, God doesn't call the equipped, but he equips the ones he calls. I think there is a wonderful spiritual truth in there. So just as a summary, we are called to be God's workers. We are not called to give more than we can give, but we're called to give according to our ability. If we then give according to our ability, we may rest and we may find wonderful joy in knowing that it is God himself who will provide the increase. So as we go home, or as we stay home for the ones who maybe are joining online, just reflect this week. Reflect on your ability. What has God given you that you may share with the church, so that we may all find joy in giving? Amen.